Welcome to the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show for the first week of June. Yeah, see how I did that? Show news, anonymous, deep fakes, IP and P hacks, and IPv6 as referenced by Joff Thayer last night. All this and more on the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. As technology continues to evolve and expand, so have the countless ways our critical systems can be put in jeopardy. Ransomware attacks, misconfiguration, user error, and malicious threat actors, to name a few. As IT infrastructures continue to grow and diversify, how do you ensure stable security? Core Security, a help systems company, provides an analytics-driven, layered approach to security with a portfolio that enables both proactive and reactive responses. With Core Security, you can reduce risk by limiting access, detect upcoming and active threats, test for security weaknesses, and efficiently monitor data for actionable insights. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/core security. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
All right. I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University, your host, and welcome to the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show. First, let's wrap up all the show topics for this week. So don't forget to subscribe to the Security Weekly Discord server. Sorry, I stuck that in there. So you can chat with all the hosts and guests and others during the live shows or whenever you like, because there's people on there all the time, seems like. It's free, and there's a link in the wiki. Level 8 conference is tomorrow, so lots of hosts, including me, will be in the Level 8 Discord room, or Layer 8, sorry. Layer 8 Discord Security Weekly room. So if you want to chat during the virtual con, there will be people hanging around to chat with you. On Application Security Weekly number 109, Mike, Matt, and John had an interview with John Cherhart, a customer experience engineer at Google Cloud. The topic was about account takeover tactics and how to prevent them. This is a really nice topic about password spraying and credential stuffing and all the stuff that people use all the time against various platforms out there. And, basically, I don't know about you, but I get asked about this all the time. I get people saying, I think my account was hacked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you might want to check this one out and use it. Even if you already feel like you know all this, you might want to use it for referrals. So it's a pretty good opportunity to give some of your users something to look at. A second interview with Catherine Chambers, who's a senior product manager at Erdetto. And they were talking about, again, app security and the risk from mobile devices, in particular the security of apps. Again, this is a really good one to pass along. There were several news stories this week, and I actually have a news story later about application security, so definitely something to keep up with. On Business Security Weekly number 175, Paul, Jason, and Matt had an interview with our friend Jen Ellis, who's the VP of Community and Public Affairs at Rapid7. This was about policies which may actually disrupt cybercrime in some significant way. So some of her strategies included cyber bomb, hackback, which is always controversial, vulnerability disclosure, and other approaches. I know that I've seen several, I won't name any names, I've seen several government people get pretty upset about hackback questions, and hacking back has always been one of those controversial things. It was kind of like something people did back in the 90s. Then it became kind of a problem, and today, of course, there are actual federal laws against, different people have different interpretations of that, but hacking back is certainly something you might want to keep up with. On Enterprise Security Weekly number 186, John, Matt, and Paul had an interview with Alyssa Miller, who is an application security advocate at Sneak. They were talking about how Sneak helps you deal with the chain of dependencies in your deployments and all the various moving parts. I really like that because one of the things we keep talking about on different shows, we were talking about it last night, we're talking about all kinds of things, is the amount of dependencies that are starting to be embedded in things that you're developing, whether it's software that you're just using or software that you're developing. People are starting to put a lot more into those that rely on other pieces. So how you keep up with all that is starting to be a real issue. A second interview was with Aaron Reinhardt and Casey Rosenthal from Verica. Aaron is the CTO and Casey's the CEO. This one was about chaos engineering and security, continuous integration, delivery, and verification. It was a fun segment, so it's definitely worth a listen if you have a chance. On the Security Weekly News, number 30 was 39. Jason Wood joined me with expert commentary on fraud and spoofing in the contact tracing business. As contact tracing has grown and the need for contact tracing apps is growing, scammers are using this very heavily as a launching point for phishing and also other sorts of attacks, including embedded attacks as well as just straight up phishing type stuff. On Security and Compliance Weekly number 30, Jeff, Matt, Josh, and Scott had an interview with Josh Corman, who is the co-founder of I Am the Cavalry. Josh has been a fierce critic of PCI DSS, and of course, Jeff is a big advocate of PCI. So, you know, if you really have been waiting for the Texas cage match with Jeff Mann and Josh Corman, well, get ready to rumble. In the second part of the show, Josh was not defeated or dismissed in the first part of the show. Josh returns then with a discussion about regulation of IoT devices and how regulation fits in with security compliance and risk management. So always a fun show, and always that show seems so relevant to everything I'm doing. So all that stuff about IoT and compliance and risk management is a huge topic right now in the industry. So definitely something worth listening to if you get the chance. On Paul's Security Weekly, episode 654 last night, I was fortunate enough to get the FCC lifted the ban on me and let me back on Paul's Security Weekly after a hiatus since, I think, March. So it was a long time. I felt like I was getting back on my addiction last night. So it was a long time to not be on Paul's Security Weekly for me in the last quite a while. It's been a long, I don't know how many years it's been since I started being on Security Weekly, but it was a long time between me being on there. Two great tech segments on the show last night. I loved seeing the tech segments. One of my favorite parts of Security Weekly. First up, Paul shared his Docker-based Nmap vulnerability scanner and showed how Nmap can be used to generate really nice analysis using Excel even, and generating XML data from your network, whether it's an enterprise network or your home network. And we ended up having a pretty good conversation about home network scanning and segmentation. And if you ever want to get that, like, I feel inferior stuff, is when you start hearing people talk about how many VLANs they have in their home network, and you're going, how many VLANs do I have in my home network? So it was quite interesting. In the second segment, our friend always, Corey Thune from Gravwell, I don't know, I have a thing with A's. Gravwell confessed that changing the name from Sinkhole to Gravwell was a good idea, which I was glad to hear. That was a long time ago, but and then he went ahead and demonstrated how to effectively use their free community edition to manage PCAPs in practice. Because if you've ever done any PCAP work with Wireshark or any of these other tools, you know how difficult it is to collect that and how voluminous that data gets, and then how hard it is to figure out what exactly it is you want to look at. It's free, so you should be checking that out. And they do have a beta testers group that if you want to join, you can. There's a link to that in the segment, so if you want to go in there and check that out, you can. And there should be a link in the Pulse Security Weekly wiki from last night. And of course, we had a great news segment. And I know I got them talking about mainframes again, and Joff and I got started talking about IPv6 and packets. So it was a lot of great stuff there. And Joff actually has an upcoming webcast about IPv6. So all that, and of course the news, that the regular news on the show. Paul and I were drinking scotch. We had two different kinds of scotch on the show last night. Both were good, and we had a bottle of Bordeaux that I brought in. We were not mixing them together in the same glass, although I guess we were ultimately mixing them together in our stomachs. But that's always fun, and it was good. So lots of fun. First time back with two hosts. Granted, we were 6 feet apart. But we were having a good time, so I really miss getting to do that. My favorite threat of the week is going to have to be IPv4. I know it's not a security thing. I do, and if you didn't watch the show last night, you missed Joff talking about how regional issuers of IP addresses are going to run out of resellable addresses this year. Now, the original issuance of IPv4 addresses actually officially ran out in 2011, which was later than people thought it was going to run out, but that's when they actually just said there are no more. But there is a resale market for it, but the problem with the resale market, just like the problem with the original market, is that there are just a lot of devices out there that want public IPs, and there's only so many, 2 to the 32nd, and it's not even really that many, 2 to the 32nd minus 2, really minus 1, 2 to the 32nd minus 1 addresses, but that doesn't include, because a lot of that space is excluded for private addresses, and on and on and on. Basically, the same solution exists that we had in 2000 and that we had in 2011 is IPv6. And why did I call it a threat? Well, it's time that you need to start learning IPv6, and you need to start thinking about how is IPv6 going to affect my network as this starts to become a thing again. And we had this conversation back in 2011. We had it back in, I don't know, around 2005. I remember having that conversation. But basically, imagine the sheer luxury of slipping into that 128-bit address space and casting aside the bounds of 32-bit living. I mean, it does mean you're going to have to change how you do things. The original intent was that we would use this massive address space for all these, flat public networks that we had back in, 2003 or whatever. And as we've switched over to these sort of pseudo-private networks using NAT technology, so that's SNATs and PATs. Everybody's comfortable with that PAT model, right? Because you use private addressing in IPv4, and then you've got that PAT, port address translator, at the border, or you use SNAT for your static IPs. But, everybody gets nervous when we start talking about getting rid of that, because I actually have a problem with it, because a lot of people feel like that security through obscurity stuff is actually some kind of security, but it's really not. When we start talking about making every address public again, everybody gets a little bit nervous about that. But that just means we need to do a different approach to the security on that. So maybe it's time that you set up some things in your home lab and start experimenting with IPv6 and what kind of impact it's going to have, and start setting up some simulators and things for your enterprise to start thinking about it. We do teach it in Cisco class. And you can run it on a lot of equipment. Microsoft supports it, but there's going to be legacy issues when you start putting that stuff in place. But get ready, and get ready to go with that. And so now all the news from the shows. An IPNP tunneling protocol, IPNIP tunneling protocol can be exploited for denial of service attack, was found to impact Cisco and other vendors in a CERT advisory, CVE 2020-10136. And I put links to all that in the wiki. This can be exploited by remote attackers, and it essentially, there's a lot to it. So I actually put multiple things there in the wiki. There's a Tenable article that really works through how IP and IP works. Basically, it's a packet wrapped in another packet. So this is how this sort of type of encryption actually works. They're real, when you hear people talk about a pipe or tunneling, it's not really a pipe or a tunnel. It's just a packet wrapped in another packet. Apparently, this attack can be used to cause the encryption envelope, so that's the outer packet, the outer IP packet, to be stripped away, and that reveals this inner unencrypted packet, which has the actual source and destination and all this other stuff on it. If that happens, then the ACL on the interface where the packet is arriving may not function in the way it was intended. And there's a lot of different things that might lead to, and again, there was some discussion about this. Joff was talking about this a lot on the show last night. But this can cause a crash, is one of the things that can happen. which would end up with a denial of service. But it can also cause the packet to be redirected in some fashion if those ACLs don't behave the way you thought they were going to behave. Because now all of a sudden you've got the raw IP destination addresses instead of the endpoint destination on the packet. It's definitely an interesting vulnerability that you may want to read up on if you're using any of the series of Cisco, HP, and other equipment that's listed in this article. So you should probably check this out and see if you're subject to this vulnerability. Oh, I don't like this story. Zoom announced that they would eliminate end-to-end encryption for free users in a controversial move that drew fire from the security community. This end-to-end, and I'll have to explain this a little bit if you aren't up on it, the end-to-end encryption feature, which is just in the process of being added to Zoom, is actually from the source to the meeting. So they already encrypt the pipe. So between where you send this and the Zoom server is already encrypted. So your Zoom transactions on the internet were encrypted now. They will continue being encrypted, but they are going to start offering this endpoint encryption. So that means Zoom and no one else can actually see what's going on. Basically, they were going to add that in, but then they suddenly announced that basically what's going to happen is that only paid subscribers to Zoom will get this end-to-end encryption. Everybody else will actually only have this the stream encryption that's already there. So the site-to-site kind of point. I guess the controversy and the reason I don't like this, and I kind of joined in the security community with this, was the CEO, Eric Yuan, said on Twitter that it had to do with law enforcement and the ability to stop Zoom bombing and hate speech and all these other things, which the first thing that bothered me about that was, I guess paid users are okay to do this stuff. So, I mean, if not having it means you can stop hate speech, I guess paid users are okay to go with hate speech. I really thought that was a lame explanation for what was going on. It apparently had something to do with the ability of law enforcement to then see this stuff, I guess, when they want to prosecute somebody for Zoom bombing. I'm not sure. It was not really clear exactly what they were talking about there. Abandoned apps may pose a security risk to mobile devices. I told you I had a story about this. I didn't get to mention this one last night on the show, but I do think it's important to mention. We keep hearing more and more stories about mobile device risk, about phishing, smishing, and all these other kind of focuses on mobile devices now and how that's a risk to the enterprise. And more scams have been emerging involving mobile devices as well. So if you think about all the apps that you have installed on your phone over the years, and remember, a lot of times when we switch phones, we just move everything over. That weird game you saw somebody playing in the airport and you like downloaded it and you installed it and you played it once and then you never looked at it again? It's still there probably. The banking app you had from the bank you had 2 banks ago in 2013 is still there. You don't use them, but they may still provide a surface for an attack. I kind of thought maybe apps should start having an expiration date, like Roy Batty and Blade Runner. That was the main theme of Blade Runner, right? That these androids might need pruning every now and then, so they had a fixed lifespan. So maybe apps should have something like that too, because they could just be laying there with flaws and vulnerabilities, and you haven't gone and updated them because you don't use them at all. DeepStar is an open source deepfake detection toolkit. I thought that was an interesting thing to see. It's basically AI that tries to detect if a video is a deepfake. So I got an ad this morning that was for a voice generator. So it was an AI-driven voice generator that per the ad. So I haven't tested this. I don't know anything much about it. I just saw this ad pop up, I guess because I was talking about deepfakes and things out loud. Basically, it said it could generate either a high-quality AI voice of radio quality, if my voice wasn't up to snuff, or it could enhance my voice so that I sound better. I was like, wow, take the hint, Doug. But deepfake takes all this to the point where AI can literally be used to put someone's face and voice on another person or another video or even an artificially generated video. And as this becomes a tool for phishing, attacks, etc., all this can become necessary to have some kind of means to detect false videos. And in the early days of forensics, when I first started doing forensics, all digital evidence was treated as hearsay only. So you could not admit it as evidence of fact in court. Very few judges would look at it because they felt like it could be modified, and there was no way to detect. I remember being asked that question by a judge: can a video or a photograph be modified in such a way that we couldn't tell? So they were still using Polaroids. So if you've seen like cop shows, even in things like that, or you've seen police at crime scenes or accident scenes using Polaroids back then, that's why, because the judges might not allow them doing it. So if we can create fake videos that look real, well, you get the idea. There's been a lot of controversy around pornography where they take celebrities' faces and put them into deep fake videos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Apple paid out $100,000 for the bug bounty that was found in their Sign-in with Apple tool that was released in June of 2019. The tool was Apple's entrance into the market to provide a way to authenticate with your Apple ID on third-party accounts. So this is just like log in with Facebook, log in with Google, et cetera, et cetera. This approach, which we've seen used all over the place, is pretty popular. Everybody's always looking for that sort of single sign-on holy grail. Bhavik Jain, though, found a problem with this where essentially a request to Apple could get you information about the Apple ID, and then a request to a different site would generate an authentication token using the Apple ID. So if you knew an Apple ID, you could generate an authentication token, and then that authentication token could be used to compromise a third-party account. Wow. Apple has patched this flaw, but it's a huge victory for bug bounties, and it helps to demonstrate the worth of bug bounty type programs, at least to me. I mean, I'm glad we're doing these, and I'm glad they're paying real money out for a real serious app. I mean, that was probably worth more than $100,000, but Apple did put up some big bucks, so that encourages people to turn these things in. Anonymous has returned and put up videos. They attacked the Minneapolis police server, among other things, and they announced on Twitter that they would shortly reveal damning information about U.S. President Donald Trump. Revil had threatened to do that's a ransomware group, had threatened to do something similar back in May, but it didn't amount to much. So the account Anon News, a Twitter account which is affiliated with Anonymous, made this announcement. But before they could release the information, the account was removed by Twitter, for being spam. Interesting. So I guess we'll have to wait and see if the news is released through some other outlet from Anonymous. But it was an interesting move by Twitter, possibly a part of this new Twitter focus on removing, false news and in news that might incite violence or whatever. Cybersecurity spending has hit a temporary pause during the pandemic, which, due to the overall chaos and business losses, doesn't seem to be a real surprise to me. But with cybercrime going up at the same time, it's probably not the best time to be cutting back in the cybersecurity arena. Gartner estimated that a $6.7 billion decrease in overall global security spending was going to occur in 2020 for both software and services. So basically everything's on hold, and I know a lot of companies are cutting back and experiencing financial losses and at least financial uncertainty going forward. So we've certainly seen some things like that. And finally, something good this week. On Saturday, May 30th, astronauts launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the first time since 2011. So it was the first time U.S. astronauts launched from Kennedy Space Center since the space shuttle program ended in 2011. Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley flew the NASA, the joint project NASA SpaceX Dragon up to the International Space Station and docked with it on Sunday morning. It was the first commercial flight of astronauts into space. If you did miss it, NASA had live streams of the whole like 20 plus hours of this from like the moment they took off until they actually docked and came on board the International Space Station. But if you want to just see the outtakes and the short version, you can go on their site and check that out. And that is the news wrap up for the week of 31 May 2020 in the time of plague. As things start to reopen, please use some courtesy and some common sense. I'm Doug White from the always online cybersecurity program at Roger Williams University. We'll see you next week with the network that never shuts down, Security Weekly. Read the science and stay safe.